Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Finca La Tormenta wash processed Honduras from Gluck Coffee Spot. There's the jar right there. And Gluck, based out of Kumamoto, Japan. And this is their first ever appearance on this channel, as they're a coffee roaster I had zero familiarity with going into this review. We picked this coffee up from the Coffee Village part of the SCAJ event after we were approached by one of the baristas asking if we were interested in trying a sample of one of their coffees. And this is the one that caught my interest the most, as it's the one that sounded the most like my type of coffee. But truth be told, I was a little disappointed by the sample that they had served me. However, they did explain that it had been roasted just 2 days prior, and they were fully expecting this coffee to open up quite a bit from that point going forward. So I figured I would give it a shot to see how it turned out, as this right here is day 38. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe, which is a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee, I did find it pretty interesting that when we were at Kurasu shop, Gluck is the coffee roaster that they were featuring alongside of their regular coffees. And I find that interesting because I do find the roast profiles of these coffees to be pretty similar, as I imagine this is on the lighter end of the spectrum for the coffees that Gluck roasts. And it's pretty similar to a lot of the coffees that Kurasu has listed on their lighter side of things, which is to say that it's a moderately light coffee, but not necessarily an overly light coffee. Still a little bit more in the realm of that medium light sort of coffee profile by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and the cup came out pretty tea-like right from the start, with a slight dark savory tea aspect to the cup as well. There was immediately a vibrant citric component to the finish with an undertone of this honey sweetness. A bit of a darker florality as well, giving the cup plenty of depth. So a lot to pick out from this coffee right from the start. For anybody that might not be aware, this is a geisha coffee, and that's one of the main reasons it caught my interest. It was a Honduran geisha coffee, and I figured it might offer some unique and interesting complexity to it. Day 18, opted for the Chemex, and it settled a bit, as it wasn't quite as intense on the citrus, but a little bit more even in terms of this fresh fruit aspect, as there was an ever so slight peach component to the cup. The citrus remained pretty prominent, but there was a nice bit of depth to it, as there was much more of a candied sweetness, in addition to this rose-like florality that was definitely present within the cup. That was the first time I'd experienced it, but it would be a note that would be persistent from this point going forward. As on day 21, we opted for the V60 one more time with a more fine grind and higher temperatures. And the coffee is borderline day and night, as on this day it really skyrocketed in terms of the clarity. Fruit profile and sweetness from the previous experience in much more abundance. A lot of the classic floral and citric geisha profiles within it as well, with a notable bit of brightness. Fresh melons, a slight peachy nectarine quality to it, also quite well pronounced, and most specifically a very well defined and articulated rose, leading to a very nice day of this coffee. We continue on to day 25 and another try through the V60, as the cup seems to be settling a fair bit more on this day as well. The rose-like florality is defined and pronounced, and it has even dialed back a fair bit of the citric components to it, with a delicate, ripe, soft fruit present yet again. So I was experiencing a fair bit more of those peachy aspects to it to complement what was a very well-defined and articulated rose profile to it. It is pretty soft and clean in general, with this fresh, fruity, and floral finish within the cup. Best day so far. That was just with our standard recipe through the V60, and that's why I really settled on that being my preferred brew method. Day 28, same adjustments with the Chemex, and it was much different with the Chemex, as it was focusing a little bit more on the savory aspects of this one. So there is a very notable tea-like component to it, a little bit more of an earthy green tea-like aspect to it. Also a fair bit of the florality this time, and a little bit more of this herbal sense. So just a little bit more reminiscent for me of hibiscus, as opposed to what was once a very well articulated rose-like quality. Less clean, a stronger focus on the more herbal aspect side of things, but not quite as good as the previous day. So we continue on to day 33. And back to our day 25 recipe, and the cup was back to its best as it does offer a very clean base, allowing for a very well-defined floral as well as fresh fruit forward cup. More of the strong rose-like components in a very defined manner, with an abundance of fruits ranging from a melon to a sweeter stone fruit, but most prominently a grapefruit-like sweetness and also a slight bitterness in that citric sense to kind of contrast all of those things. Additional characteristics included more of that green tea savoriness and an ever so slight smoky quality, but also a notable bit of candied sweetness. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have one level 5, so let's go through that real quick. And that is the cleanliness level 5. So yes, it's something that I mentioned pretty early on, and it could have been marred by the ever so slight smoky quality that you do see in this tasting wheel. But I feel like the rose profile in it was just so well defined that I had justified at least scoring that level 5 mark, because the entirety of the cup was pretty clean to begin with. Perhaps the lower side of level 5, but even then, I think it was just clean enough in so many specific manners. I'm thinking, of course, the fruit components as well as the floral components to justify that level 4 mark. So, correction, level 5 mark. So, lower side of level 5, but still great clarity within this cup right from the onset. Finish, level 4. So that one had a lot to do with the kind of lingering floral components that are present within it, as I'm still tasting a lot of those. We'll just say red floral aspects that are present right now. Level 4, I don't think I really have too much to add to that. Same thing with the sweetness. It was a slightly sweeter coffee, and it was kind of interesting that a lot of the sweetness did come from the floral components within it, as sweeter florals aren't necessarily the most abundant thing. They're not the most common thing, but for this one right here, having a fair bit of sweetness in that specific sense, also a fair bit of fruit sweetness too, did seem to help. The entire cup felt a little candied too, so I imagine that they were probably using some sort of gas-powered roaster for this coffee. Nonetheless, level 4, plenty of sweetness in this one. I completely agree with that. Acidity, level 4. Yes, there's a fair bit of brightness to this one. And I think I'd previously mentioned that there's a fair bit of the citric components to this cup, and I feel like that played quite a role in this coffee in general. So acidity, level 4. Continue on, florality, level 4. And yes, there are times where I feel like this could have been bumped all the way up there to that level 5, as this one had great definition to that rose, and it's something that I keep harping on, but it's because it did remind me of a coffee I had a very long time ago from Dragonfly that just tasted like straight rose water. This one right here offers a very well-defined rose components to it, and I feel like that's the first direction I really want to point somebody towards for this coffee, because a lot of the times people can't necessarily differentiate floral components, but when you do have a coffee that tastes so specific in one direction, it makes it very easy for you to pick that out from that point going forward. A lot of hard coffees have some very nice definitions of the floral components to them. This one right here did so as well. Higher side of level 4, but a level 4 nonetheless. We have quite a few fruit components, very fruit, level 4. Yes, I previously mentioned that there was this sweeter melon aspect to it, and I could definitely see a fair bit of that throughout. So since that one was notably abundant a lot of the time throughout this coffee, level 4 felt fitting for it. Citrus fruit, level 4. That's another one I had previously mentioned, is that there's a slight bitter citric quality to it. It was a little bit more reminiscent of grapefruit for me, and that's why that scored there at the level 4. Stone fruit, level 4. I honestly don't know what the tasting notes they have listed for this coffee are, because I couldn't actually find this coffee on their website any longer, and I'm not entirely sure what it was to begin with. But I don't know if they had any sort of stone fruit notes listed. If they didn't, then I was experiencing a fair bit of a peachy, nectarine, sort of sweeter fresh fruit component to this one, so that was notable enough for me to justify it at a level 4. And then a couple of level 3s, the caramel level 3, that of course insinuates the candied aspect of this coffee that was present throughout. Savoriness level 3, that's the tea-like savoriness that was also present in this coffee, as those gave it a little bit more depth and just, let's say, uniqueness to this cup. Final thing worth discussing, body level 2. And as I'm drinking this coffee on this day, I can definitely say that there's a fair bit more body than might typically be associated with a geisha. That being said, it is a Honduran coffee, so I would fully expect that to have a little bit of a role on this one, at least leading it to that level 2 mark. But as I'm kind of looking at this tasting wheel, I do think that it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All Alright, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this one. I did enjoy it. I feel like maybe I had a slight bit more expectation for it, but when you really think about what this one offered, it hits on the big four that I'm looking for. Offered great sweetness, a very nice floral profile to it, and some great fruit components, and most abundantly and notably, a very high level of clarity. So on paper, in theory, this should have been a coffee that maybe I enjoyed a little bit more than I did, but I feel like I've kind of avoided the fact that it did have that ever so slight smoky quality, which took away from it ever so slightly. The candied aspect of it was also quite nice, but I feel like the sweetness may be coming a little bit more from that floral sense, and the cup not being maybe as delicate as I would hope for, maybe a little bit more subtle as I might have hoped for it. Might have played a little bit of a role in it. That's me being very nitpicky about this coffee, because I did enjoy this coffee. I just think that this is one of the ones I had the most expectations for after purchasing it, because it sounded like such an amazing coffee. And that's to say, it still turned out pretty great, just maybe not to the same level or extent that I was hoping for from this one. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, as I've alluded to, first direction I would point somebody towards is the floral profile in it, because that was a very well-defined and articulated profile within this coffee. If you do like your rose components to it, or if you've never had a coffee and you're very curious about one that might taste like rose, this one's a great fit for you in that sense. It still offers enough of some other things, most specifically the fruit components and those candied aspects, as well as a tea-like savoriness to kind of complement and bring the rest of the cup together, all with some wonderful clarity, as it continued to offer immense clarity right from the start of this one, all the way throughout. I think maybe the other part of this is that it was just a little difficult to get this coffee exactly where I was hoping to get it, as I feel like I might have just ever so slightly missed the mark on this one. But even then, that's the best direction I can point somebody towards, and the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Finca La Tormenta, wash processed Honduras from Gluck Coffee Spot. Thank you for watching.